Good news is, this is not going to be a technical talk. This is not going to be a genealogy of Rolls-Royce engines from 1915 to 1950. The bad news is, this is not going to be a technical talk about Rolls-Royce Merlin engines or Rolls-Royce engines from 1915 to 1950. I'm going to concentrate on this engine, the aircraft it flew on, and the aircrew who flew her, and the circumstances in which I get to play with it here at the museum. Now, I will tell you, this is a Mark 25 Merlin. It's 1610 horsepower. It's a 27-litre engine. It's capable, at this end, 3,000 RPM. It's a constant speed, variable pitch setup. So this cog turns at 3,000 RPM. That turns this cog, which reduces every turn by a quarter. Then on the front of that is what actually produces your speed. So you pitch the blade according to how fast you want to go, and that will actually, if you throttle up, it will increase the amount of fuel that goes into this engine. Now, this engine was attached to HJ719 418 Squadron, Royal Canadian Air Force, and it was first flown by an American chap who snuck across the border after being convinced to join the Canadian Air Force in a pub. Now, unfortunately, they've stuck the slideshow on, so I'm going to have to find a picture of him. Bear with me, there he is. In this photo, we have this here is James Lou Loomer, an American air pilot who joined the Canadian Air Force and flew for the Canadians. This is HJ719 behind him. He's one of the few confirmed aces in Mosquito. As you can see, he's got his mission markers there. They're not kill marks, they're mission marks. And in order to become an ace, you need 5 kills. One of these kills was a Messerschmitt 410 that was flying at night, intercepting Allied bombers up in the night sky, at which point this guy shot down several, came back down, rearmed, refueled, and was in such a hurry to get back up and shoot down more bombers, he left his tail light on. James Loomer is loitering around the airfield, waiting for targets of opportunity, saw this vivid bright white light disappear off into the night and chased after it and confirming his standing as an ace. Now, once you become an ace, you get a bit of notoriety about you, you become known as the man that can in the squadron, and the Americans and the Canadians like to put nose art on the aircraft. So here we have Moonbeam McSwine. She's a gun-toting, pipe-smoking hillbilly lass from the Little Abner comic strip. Little Abner is a comic strip that was very suggestive. There was lots of lingerie, very tongue-in-cheek, very suggestive. He completes 30 missions. In the Commonwealth Air Forces, you do 30 missions, you then get given the option of either continuing to fight, like certain pilots would, or do something slightly more dangerous of teaching people how to fly, or something even worse, a desk job. So he went on to train. The aircraft passes to a very young pilot, and I mean a very young pilot, and this is Pat McGale. I've shaved more often than he has. He's a full pilot in this picture because he's got his double wings, and he's been given charge of Moonbeam McSwine, which the aircraft is now technically termed as, rather than HJ719, because that just rolls off the tongue. And in June 24, 1944, he's joined by his navigator, Ed Story. These guys are part of an intruder squadron, so they would go out and look for targets that were coming over to the UK from France and shoot them down. Now, the 24th of June, 2 weeks after D-Day, the Germans are a little preoccupied with what's going on the ground in France. So the Luftwaffe is also preoccupied with what's going on down there. At which point, the Germans start implementing their wonder weapons. This is the V1 Doodlebug, or the buzz bomb. 900 kilos of explosives, powered by a pulse jet engine capable of 400 plus miles an hour. It is essentially the world's first cruise missile. And the Germans are throwing these at us by the hundreds. Now, fortunately, they're not guided. Initially, these were designed to travel at 10,000 feet. They would fly over, the engine would be timed by the little propeller on the front. At a certain count, it would cut the engine off and the bomb would fall. Now, if you heard a buzz bomb, you didn't have a problem. It's when you stopped hearing it. It became, because it was falling. Now these guys are travelling across the English Channel, heading towards the UK. Now fortunately, because they don't have much in the way of guidance, they don't really steer. So once they established where the ramps were and their intended targets, the British intelligence were able to set up defensive corridors. That is, they'd have a section lined up and they would increase the anti-aircraft guns and upgrade those to quicker firing anti-aircraft guns to shoot these things down. They would increase the observer corps, focus radar there, and also dedicate aircraft to patrol those lanes. There are very few aircraft in the Allies' arsenal that can keep up with a V1 in level flight. The Mark 6 Mosquito is not amongst those aircraft. So these guys would have to use tactics and be guided into the path of these things. They would fly about 5,000 feet off the sea, whereas the V1 is actually poodling along about 2,000 feet. They would come in above and then they would dive. As soon as the missile disappeared below them, they would come down and strafe with the 20mm cannons that were on the front of this thing, because the 303 machine guns aren't really effective against the steel construction of the V1. They would strafe and come up and talk porpoise as long as they could, a bit like a dolphin. Now, these guys intercepted 3 missiles and missed 2. The third one they struck. Luckily for them, it didn't explode, because these are very volatile flying machines. The third one actually disintegrated in front of them and struck their starboard engine. The engine caught fire, at which point these boys know the mission's over. They pull back on the stick and gain as much altitude as they can before they switch off the engine, fire the extinguisher, and then feather their prop to its finest pitch. So they turn the blade into the wind so that it reduces the drag on one side of the aircraft. At this point, they realise they have another little problem. The port engine had also been damaged by the shrapnel coming off the V1, and it actually destroyed the hydraulic system of this. So, as the aircraft's moving forward, aerodynamic forces of you moving through the air force the blade back into its most neutral position. So the engine's spinning beautifully, but it's actually producing no thrust. Now these boys know they're in serious trouble. Now, there's only one way into this aircraft. As you go round the aircraft, you'll see there's a very small hatch. That's your one way in. That's also where you bail out from. The other way out is through the top. You can pop the top of the canopy. If you ditch or you belly land on the ground, if you ditch into the sea, you can pop the lid off, you can grab your little rubber dinghy and you can row off the wing and off you go. Now these guys don't fancy swimming around in the English Channel at night, so they opt to go for home. They radio home for base and they're told 260, well 260 in the English Channel takes you to the Bay of Biscay and out to the Atlantic. So the well-trained navigator on board, Ed Story, I know where we are, roughly, head north. So they head north, they cross the coast, they can see the breakers on the shore, at which point Ed Story has to go first, being the non-pilot. Has to kick the hatch open to egress the aircraft. As he jumps out, he follows the standard procedure, which is to count to 3, which means you fall away from the aircraft, at which point you reach up, you pull your D-ring, and your parachute opens beautifully above you. And it does. He floats gently to the ground on the South Downs. Pat McGall, on the other hand, as the aircraft is constantly descending, hits the flight column as he's getting up into a dive. So now he's not doing this, he's doing this. He pulls back on the stick, he jumps out the aircraft, his hand is already on his D-ring, and as soon as he leaves the aircraft, he pulls his ripcord and his parachute opens. Now, it's estimated he opened his parachute somewhere between 300 and 500 feet. Now for context, paratroopers jumping out of perfectly good aircraft into Normandy and Holland would do so at 800 feet minimum. And they've also got a cord that actually opens their parachute for them. Luckily for Pat McGill, his parachute just does open just in time to arrest his descent. Hits the ground with a thud because he's not been fully decelerated by his parachute. He jars his knee, his back and his shoulder, and he has the wind totally knocked out of his sails. And he lays there for a bit because he's winded, but also because his aircraft smashes into the ground about a mile ahead of him. Explodes into a fireball where the fuel tanks rupture and then starts cooking off its ammunition. That is, the ammunition is no longer going down the barrels of the gun, they're going off into the night of their choosing. So after shooting down his own aircraft, he doesn't fancy being shot by it either. Once the pyrotechnics finish, he gathers up his parachute, wanders over to a farmhouse he can see in the distance, parachute in underarm, bangs on the door. "Excuse me, young man, have you got a telephone I can use?" "Certainly, come in. Would you like a cup of tea?" "That'd be lovely." Sits down, rings the airbase, arranges for a transport to come and pick him up. Sitting there, enjoying his brew because everything can be made better with tea in Britain. Half an hour later, there's a bang on the door. "Oh, that must be my transport." Farmer opens the door. There's Pat McGill, Ed Story, standing there with his parachute under his arm. "I've crashed just up the road. Have you got a telephone I can use?" He walks in. "Yeah, come in. Would you like a cup of tea?" "Yes, please." Walks in, finds his pilot sitting there enjoying a brew, and it's sort of like, "What are you doing here?" A little while later, they are picked up by a transport that takes them back to their airbase. And they get seen by a medical officer who assigns these guys 2 weeks to get over their escapade, shall we say. These guys are back in a cockpit 5 days later. They are not skiving at all. Now, Pat McGill and Ed Story both make it back to Canada. And a couple of years ago, Pat McGill, his son came and visited us here at the museum. He visited from Canada, and he donated to our museum a very generous gift. He donated his father's combat log from the era. And I've got an excerpt here. And it says, June 24, Mosquito 6, number U. Self and flight officer Story. Ops, bailed out after both engines cut. Close shave. Bit more than a close shave. So after that generous gift, we sent him back with the rocker cover from his dad's Merlin engine. It was a very emotional day. Now this engine lay in the ground until 1990, where 60 years on from the Second World War, an archaeological group went out and they knew where this engine, the aircraft had crashed. So they'd gone out, dug this up, they found this engine 25 feet below the surface of the ground. Now, how much of that had been due to impact and how much had been due to the soft nature of the soil it landed on, we can only hazard a guess. It came to us in 2001, at which point we give it a little bit of a clean up. We cleaned out all the crud that had accumulated in the battle damage, and then someone asked, can we run it? And I have the privilege, the absolute privilege of turning over a wartime engine. Now, I don't use petrol because we can't afford the 4 litres of petrol per minute. It's a very thirsty engine. Now, you'll notice certain cylinders will rise and fall together. There are opposite ends of the power stroke. One will be compression, one will be exhaust, and it's mirrored throughout the engine. Under power, these piston heads will move approximately 16 times a second. You think your car's fast? Not compared to this. So, like I planned it to finish there. Now, that doesn't sound anything like a Merlin engine. We've got an approximation of what it should sound like, but it really doesn't do it justice. Now, in my world, there is no better engine note than that of the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. And I did this talk to a bunch of visitors one time, and there was a young, well, I say a young man, an old chap sitting in the corner, put his hand up, he said, "Sit behind one for a couple of hours a day, mate, see how much you enjoy it then." He was a veteran of the Second World War. So I took him up on that. I went and sat between 4 of them at East Kirby, where I rode on Just Jane in the tail gun. For 45 minutes I enjoyed the sound of 4 Rolls-Royce Merlins assaulting my eardrums. I totally get where he was coming from, but still, the best engine noise imaginable. If there's any technical questions, feel free to ask. If not, I hope you enjoy the rest of your visit here at de Havilland. Thank you.